Former Lieutenant Governor Justin Fairfax shot and killed his wife, then turned the gun on himself in a murder-suicide.
Some tense moments tonight at the General Assembly. There was a confrontation between Republican Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson and a Democratic state senator.
According to Fairfax County Police Chief Kevin Davis, the couple was in the middle of a contentious divorce up until the incident.
A warning to our viewers. What you are about to watch is a true story. The following contains content that some viewers may find disturbing. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. Just after midnight on Thursday, April 16, 2026, the silence of Guinevere Drive, Annandale, Virginia, was broken by a 911 call. A teenage boy, voice shaking, words fragmented, told the dispatcher he believed his father had just stabbed his mother. When officers arrived, they found Dr. Cerina Wanzer Fairfax dead on the basement floor of the two-story home. She had not been stabbed. Bullet casings lay near her body. Upstairs, in the primary bedroom, officers found a second victim, a man with a self-inflicted gunshot wound. He was the boy's father. He had been a federal prosecutor. He had been the 41st Lieutenant Governor of Virginia. He had, for years, publicly campaigned against gun violence. His name was Justin Fairfax. The woman on the basement floor was 49. She was a magna cum laude graduate of the Virginia Commonwealth University School of Dentistry, the owner of her own family dental practice, mother of 2 teenagers, and, from 2018 to 2022, Second Lady of the Commonwealth of Virginia. In the months before her death, Cerina had quietly installed security cameras throughout her home. 3 months before she died, those cameras had already proven publicly that her husband had lied to police about her. What they recorded in the hours before her killing was still sitting in the home's hard drives when detectives arrived. This is the story of how a woman who had once stood beside Virginia's second highest elected official at his inauguration ended up dead on a concrete floor, killed by the man she married 20 years earlier. And of how every institution that should have seen it coming wrote the warnings down, and failed to act in time. Welcome back to Fatal Casebook. Tonight, we examine a case in which the warnings were never hidden in the dark corners of a troubled man's life. They were typed onto court letterhead. They were spoken aloud by a sitting circuit court judge. And they were ignored until the hour it became too late to ignore them. Before we begin, take a moment to subscribe and turn on notifications. And now, let's begin. Cerina Wanzer was born in 1976. Long before she became known publicly as Virginia's Second Lady, she was an academic achiever with a very specific idea of who she wanted to become. She earned her Bachelor of Science degree from Duke University in 1999. It was there, on a campus she walked as an undergraduate in the late 90s, that she first met Justin Fairfax. He was a public policy student from Washington, D.C. She was bound for medical science. They would not marry until 7 years later, in Arlington, Virginia. After Duke, Cerina enrolled at VCU's School of Dentistry, part of the historic Medical College of Virginia. She graduated magna cum laude in 2005. She was inducted into Omicron Kappa Upsilon, the Dental Honor Society, and completed an additional 1-year residency in advanced education in general dentistry at the same institution. By the age of 29, she was practicing in Northern Virginia. She kept growing. She logged hundreds of hours of continuing education. She maintained active memberships in the American Dental Association, the Virginia Dental Association, and the Northern Virginia Dental Society. In 2015, VCU honored her as its outstanding graduate of the last decade, a recognition reserved for alumni whose postgraduate careers have most defined their field. She opened her own practice. Dr. Fairfax and Associates Family Dentistry sat in a quiet office park along Route 29, in the city of Fairfax. The practice was small. The clinical tone was conservative and comprehensive. And by every account of the patients who knew her in the final weeks of her life, it was extraordinarily warm. One longtime patient, Janice Hildreth, had been in the chair just days before Cerina died. She told reporters afterward that Cerina was a lovely human being, someone she had referred friends to, someone whose small staff she had grown to love. Cerina's divorce attorney, Amy Spain, put the deepest truth about her plainly. Above all else, Spain said, Cerina was a devoted mother to her 2 children, who were, in Spain's words, the very center of her world. Her son was born in 2009. Her daughter, in 2011. Neighbors who had lived on the block for decades described a mother who was constantly in the backyard with her kids, setting up activities, building things by hand, handling every project herself. One hairstylist who cut her hair said Cerina lit up when the subject turned to her chickens and the small farm she had been dreaming of running someday. She was a runner. She took her 2 Vizsla breed dogs on long trail runs in the hills around Fairfax County. She practiced Bikram yoga. She read constantly. She loved to travel. On the morning of April 16, 2026, she was less than a week from a final divorce trial she had been building toward for 9 months. She had filed for divorce on July 18, 2025. She had spent the previous year rebuilding the emotional architecture of her household. She had, just 17 days earlier, won primary physical custody of her children in a Fairfax County courtroom, along with a court order requiring her husband to vacate their home by April 30. She had done everything that Virginia law allowed a woman in her position to do. She was, finally, preparing to start over. She would not see the end of April. To understand what happened in the basement of that Annandale home, you first have to understand what had happened to the man upstairs. In January 2018, Justin Fairfax was sworn in as Virginia's 41st lieutenant governor. At 38, he was one of the youngest lieutenant governors in the country, and only the second African American ever elected to statewide office in the Commonwealth. The first had been Douglas Wilder, decades earlier. The swearing-in ceremony was not ordinary. Justin's father handed him a copy of a historical document that day, the manumission paper that had freed his ancestor Simon Fairfax from enslavement under Thomas Fairfax, 9th Lord Fairfax of Cameron, the English peer for whom Fairfax County itself is named. He carried the paper in his pocket during the oath. Cerina stood beside him. Just over a year later, Governor Ralph Northam was engulfed in a scandal involving a racist image in his medical school yearbook. For a brief, extraordinary window in early 2019, Justin Fairfax was first in line to become Virginia's second black governor, an outcome that, had it arrived, would have reshaped the national picture of the Democratic Party. That window slammed shut in February of that year. 2 women publicly accused him of sexual assault. Vanessa Tyson, a college professor, alleged an incident at the 2004 Democratic National Convention. Meredith Watson, who had known him at Duke, alleged he had raped her in 2000 while they were both students. He denied both allegations. He said the first encounter had been consensual and refused every call to resign. The allegations have never been adjudicated in court. He maintained his denial to the end of his life. But his political trajectory did not recover. The man who returned home to Annandale in January 2022, the ceremony behind him, the Commonwealth Ballroom behind him, the rising star profile behind him, was not the man Cerina had married. Justin Edward Fairfax was born on February 17, 1979, in Pittsburgh. When he was 5, his parents divorced, and his mother moved her 4 children to her parents' home in Northeast Washington, D.C. Money was tight. In his own later accounts, he credited his mother for putting all 4 of her children through college. He was a scholarship student at every step. At DeMotte Catholic High School in Hyattsville, Maryland, he was elected senior class president. He went on to Duke on scholarship, graduating in 2000 with a degree in public policy. That same summer, he worked as a briefing coordinator for Tipper Gore out of Al Gore's Nashville campaign office. After 2 years on the staff of the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee, he enrolled at Columbia Law School on a Lawrence Veen scholarship. He graduated in 2005 as a member of the Columbia Law Review. From there, the resume read like a textbook public service ascent. He clerked for Judge Gerald Bruce Lee of the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of Virginia. He joined Wilmer Hale in Washington. In 2010, he returned to the Eastern District of Virginia as an assistant United States attorney, working out of Alexandria, serving as deputy coordinator of the Northern Virginia Human Trafficking Task Force. His first run for public office came in 2013. He lost the Democratic primary for Virginia Attorney General to Mark Herring by fewer than 5,000 votes out of roughly 141,600 cast. 4 years later, he won the race for lieutenant governor, twice endorsed by the Washington Post editorial board along the way. The career that followed looked, from the outside, like a rising star rising. But the people who had known him longest described a different pattern, one that only became legible in hindsight. Sophia A. Nelson, a Virginia author and journalist who described herself as a close friend, would later tell the Associated Press that he struggled visibly after political defeats. She would say he drank heavily after the 2013 loss, and more seriously after 2019. By the time he left the lieutenant governor's office, she would tell reporters, he was, in her own painful phrasing, effectively unemployable. She also said something harder. Friends, fraternity brothers, and family members had, in the months before April 2026, urged him to seek help. In those private conversations, suicidal thoughts had been discussed. One of those conversations, Nelson told the AP, happened in a group text just 2 days before Cerina was killed. By then, he had already bought the handgun he would use on her. And in the back of every one of those conversations sat a question his closest friends were privately asking but could not answer. Did he still have it? They met on the Duke campus in the late 1990s. They married in Arlington in 2006, 7 years after Cerina finished her undergraduate degree, 1 year after she earned her doctorate. For the first decade and a half of the marriage, they looked, by every public measure, like a thriving political couple. She built the dental practice. He built the legal career. When he ran statewide in 2017, she appeared at events. When he was sworn in 2018, she stood beside him. Their children were raised in the same Annandale home, on Guinevere Drive, that they would both die in 17 years later. Then February 2019 arrived. When the sexual assault allegations against her husband became national news, Cerina did not speak publicly. She did not denounce him. She did not defend him. She stayed in the marriage. Whatever her private reasoning, no reporter ever found a public statement from her about any of the accusations made against him. 3 years later, his term ended. He left state office in January 2022. The family's financial picture began to change rapidly. According to subsequent court filings, he resigned as a partner at a prestigious law firm. An IRS lien for more than $91,000 in unpaid taxes was levied against the couple. It was eventually resolved in 2021. And then, according to Cerina's own later sworn testimony, something changed inside the house itself. Starting in 2022, she would tell the court, Justin began isolating himself inside the home office. He would emerge only to smoke cigarettes or find food. The mortgage went into default more than once. Bills went unpaid. And in that same year, he took the sum that had been set aside for the children's horseback riding lessons, and he used it to buy a handgun. That detail, buried in a custody file, would not be widely known until 4 years later. By summer 2025, Cerina had filed for divorce. By early 2026, she had installed security cameras throughout the home. She had, in other words, begun to document her husband. Cerina Fairfax did not tell her patients about what was happening inside her home. While she was scheduling cleanings and running her trail routes with her dogs, her husband, according to her sworn statements filed in Fairfax County Circuit Court, was in free fall. The judge who would later preside over their custody dispute would describe him, in formal terms, as a talented man struggling with undefined emotional and psychological issues. The court record described empty wine bottles, dirty laundry piling up, a home office in which a former federal prosecutor had gradually stopped participating in the life of his own family. In 2022, he disappeared for the first time. He left the house one day with a suitcase, some clothes, and the handgun he had bought with his children's riding lesson money. His family searched for hours. Cerina's stepfather and one of Justin's uncles eventually found him alone in a wooded area of a public park not far from the house. They could not calm him. Over the course of several hours, his brother finally called in a mental health professional to reach him. The court documents describe what had happened to him that day only as, in the restrained language of the Fairfax County Circuit Court, some kind of adverse psychological event. No arrest was made. No charges filed. He came home. He kept the gun. By the time Cerina filed for divorce in July 2025, the emotional toll was documented on both sides. The custody order would acknowledge that she herself, during arguments, had called her husband names she came to regret, and that the home had experienced what the judge described, using similarly careful language, as a flurry of slaps. The marriage was troubled on both sides. Both people inside it were struggling. But only one of them had a firearm no court had ever ordered surrendered. On March 30, 2026, Fairfax County Circuit Court Judge Timothy J. McEvoy issued a written custody order after a two-day hearing. He wrote, in formal legal language, what friends had been saying in private for years, that Justin Fairfax's isolation, drinking, and disengagement from his family appeared to reflect, in the judge's paraphrased finding, a deep and sustained sense of fatalism and hopelessness. The same order recorded that there was no evidence he was seeking professional help. The judge flagged that absence as significantly troubling to the court. He did not order him into treatment. He did not order the firearm removed. 17 days later, it was used. It was Wednesday, April 15, 2026. Cerina worked her ordinary schedule at the Route 29 practice. A patient she had seen earlier that week later told reporters that the dentist had been as warm in those final appointments as she had ever been. There is no indication, in any public interview with any patient, staff member, or colleague, that Cerina ever gave a single person in her office any reason to believe she was in danger. Somewhere that same Wednesday, her husband was served with court paperwork regarding an upcoming show cause hearing scheduled for April 21. By April 30, only 15 days away, he was required by court order to be out of the house. That evening, her son was home. Her daughter was home. Her dogs were in the house. Her cameras were on. She had no idea that the paperwork her husband had just been handed had already started the last 12 hours of her life. Shortly after midnight on Thursday, April 16, 2026, something shifts inside the house on Guinevere Drive. Justin Fairfax, sleeping in a separate bedroom, as he has been for months, leaves his room. He retrieves the handgun he purchased in 2022 with the money set aside for his children's riding lessons. He moves through the home the court has given him 15 more days to occupy. He descends to the basement. Cerina is there. She is alone. At 12:12 a.m., a teenage voice reaches Fairfax County Dispatch. The boy is calling from inside the home. He is the couple's son. His description is fragmented and urgent. According to the dispatch audio later captured by the public safety stream Broadcastify, the operator repeats the nature of the call for responding officers. The caller is stating that his father may have stabbed his mother. By the time that call is being logged, Dr. Cerina Wanzer Fairfax is already dead. She has been shot multiple times with the firearm her husband bought almost 4 years earlier. What follows is recorded in the radio traffic of the Fairfax County Police Department. Officers arrive at the 8100 block of Guinevere Drive within minutes. The son exits the house and gives them a physical description of his father. The officers clear the residence room by room. In the basement, they find Cerina. Over the radio, one officer announces the scene in the flat, clinical language of emergency response, a confirmed fatality, female, on the floor. Then the officers move upstairs. In the primary bedroom, they find the second body. A man. A firearm. A single, self-inflicted gunshot wound. Fairfax County Police Chief Kevin Davis will confirm, standing outside the home a few hours later, that the weapon in the bedroom is the same weapon that killed Cerina in the basement. The shooting, he will tell reporters, had happened fast. No prolonged confrontation. No prior 911 calls that evening. No audible warning. Between the moment Justin Fairfax fired and the moment his son dialed dispatch, there was, by the department's own preliminary findings, almost no interval at all. Both teenagers have just heard the two shots that ended their parents' lives. Both are still inside the house when officers reach the primary bedroom and find the second body. In the days that follow, investigators will reconstruct the final hours before the shooting. They will confirm what Chief Davis said that first morning, that the paperwork served on Justin Fairfax earlier in the day, the notice of his upcoming April 21 court appearance, appears to have been the specific trigger. They will confirm something else as well. The cameras Cerina had installed, the cameras she had mounted because she did not feel safe in her own house, had, by the department's early assessment, almost certainly been active during the moments immediately before, during, and after her death. She had spent months quietly documenting her husband. The last thing she ever documented was what he did to her. There was no cover-up in the classic sense. Justin Fairfax did not stage a scene. He did not try to dispose of a body. He did not construct an alibi. He had, however, tried something similar before, 3 months earlier, and entirely in plain view. In January 2026, officers were called to the same Annandale home. Not because of Cerina. Because of Justin. He reported to the Fairfax County Police Department that his wife had physically assaulted him. It was, on its face, a criminal allegation, the kind that carries serious consequences in custody and divorce proceedings. The kind of claim that, had it stood, might have shifted the legal terrain of the couple's ongoing divorce decisively in his favor. Officers took the report. They opened an investigation. And then they asked to see the interior of the home. Cerina Fairfax had installed security cameras throughout the house months earlier, at some point during the divorce proceedings. She had done so, according to reporting, because of a pattern of domestic disturbances she did not feel she could safely ignore. The footage showed the opposite of what her husband had claimed. Fairfax County Police Chief Kevin Davis would later confirm, at a press briefing held outside the Annandale home on the morning of her death, that officers had reviewed the footage and that the alleged assault, in his words, never occurred. No arrest was made. A report was written. The allegation was formally labeled untrue. By January 2026, then, Justin Fairfax, a former federal prosecutor, a former officer of the court, had already made a formal, demonstrable, and documented false statement to Virginia law enforcement about his own wife. The cameras had caught it. And they had not stopped recording when he returned to the house. When officers arrived at Guinevere Drive in the early hours of April 16, they entered what Chief Davis would publicly describe that morning as a deeply chaotic domestic scene. The son was the first person they encountered. He had been the 911 caller. He was, by any reasonable measure, in the immediate aftermath of one of the most traumatic experiences a teenager in America can survive. His description of his father, to the dispatcher, then to the responding officers, allowed the department to identify and physically locate the shooter within the building within minutes. The officers cleared the home room by room. They found Cerina in the basement. Her injuries were consistent with gunfire. They found the second firearm wound upstairs, in the primary bedroom, along with the weapon itself. The radio traffic captured at the scene corroborated what the chief would confirm publicly that morning: the injury to the upstairs body was self-inflicted. Detectives from the Fairfax County Police Department's Major Crimes Bureau arrived within the hour. The department secured a search warrant for the residence. Officers remained on scene throughout the morning. By the time Chief Davis stood before reporters a few hours later, the outlines of the case were already sharp. A former lieutenant governor of Virginia had killed his wife and then himself in a domestic-related murder-suicide. The motive sat in more than a year of contentious divorce litigation, culminating in a court order requiring him to vacate the home by the end of the month. What investigators did not yet have, in those first hours, was a full forensic inventory of the home's electronic record. The security system Cerina had installed, the same system that had disproven her husband's January allegation, was still operational. When the chief was asked at the briefing whether he believed the cameras had been rolling during the killing itself, his answer was direct: he believed they had been active and recording throughout. Which meant that, even with both parties now beyond any criminal trial, the truth of what happened in the basement was still retrievable. It was sitting inside the house. And it was about to be reviewed. This was not an investigation that required a breakthrough in the traditional sense. There was no whodunit. There was no prosecution that would need physical evidence to meet a reasonable doubt standard. There would be no trial. There would be no jury. There would be no defense. But there was an institutional breakthrough, and it came, again, from the same source that had spoken for Cerina Fairfax back in January. The cameras she had purchased and installed herself. By the morning of April 16, that modest home security system had already accomplished something no other piece of evidence in any political figure murder-suicide had ever accomplished in the Commonwealth. It had corroborated a woman's truthfulness against her husband's false police report. It had confirmed that Justin Fairfax, a Columbia Law graduate, a former federal prosecutor, a man whose entire professional life had been built on the interpretation of evidence, had lied, on the record, to Virginia law enforcement about his own wife. What those cameras had recorded earlier in the morning of her death has not, as of this broadcast, been released publicly. That footage exists. Fairfax County Police have it. It is effectively evidence in a closed criminal matter. Both parties are deceased, but it is active material in the broader historical record of a Virginia political marriage. What it already tells the public, before any single frame of it is released, is this. A woman who was being accused publicly of being an abuser had purchased and installed the exact equipment required to prove that she was not. She had, in effect, been quietly gathering evidence against the man she was still married to. In hindsight, the cameras were never surveillance. They were a safety protocol. And until the night he killed her, she had kept herself safe with them. Because Justin Fairfax killed himself in the primary bedroom of the home he was scheduled to vacate, he never faced a criminal prosecutor. But in the final weeks of his life, he had faced a judge. On March 30, 2026, 17 days before Cerina died, the Fairfax County Circuit Court issued a custody order. It is that order, sitting now in the public record of a Virginia trial court, that functions today as the closest equivalent to a legal finding on the final pattern of Justin Fairfax's life. The order was the product of a 2-day custody hearing. It was careful. It was non-punitive in its tone. It granted him joint legal custody of his 2 children, a finding that reflected a judge trying, deliberately, to preserve a father's role in his children's lives. But it also said, in plain language, what his friends and his wife had been saying for years. The judge documented the 2022 gun incident. He documented the isolation. He documented the binge drinking. He described a talented man struggling with undefined emotional and psychological issues, and a home in which, as the court's own language put it, tensions had been extremely high for an extended period. The same order granted Cerina primary physical custody of their children. It ordered Justin out of the house by the end of April. It noted that the children's emotional resilience, through the years of his withdrawal, had come down, in the court's own evocative phrasing, to their mother's grit. He did not accept the ruling. 13 days later, on April 13, he filed 2 final motions. They claimed that Cerina had pursued the divorce in bad faith, arguing that because they still shared a roof, she could not have demonstrated the legal intent to permanently separate. Those motions were still sitting, unadjudicated, in the circuit court's docket on April 16, the morning he killed her. By the time the Annandale house was ringed by yellow tape, the paper trail on Justin Fairfax's unraveling already ran to thousands of pages. He had been, in the final weeks of his life, the subject of his own investigation. His own conduct had been documented by his wife, by his judge, by police responding to his own false allegation, and by the recording system in his own house. There will be no criminal trial for the death of Dr. Cerina Wanzer Fairfax. The man who killed her is dead. The children who witnessed her final hours are in the care of family. But the question of what a Virginia court formally found to be true about Justin Fairfax in the weeks before she died is not a matter of speculation. The record exists. It is public. The March 30th order is its centerpiece. Its language matters, not because it is more emotional than ordinary judicial language, but because it is markedly more restrained. Virginia Circuit Court judges do not casually describe a litigant before them as exhibiting patterns of fatalism and despair. They do not casually note, in formal findings, that the absence of professional treatment is significantly troubling. They do so only when the record supports the finding. In this case, it did. The judge documented the binge drinking Cerina had described as a daily pattern. He documented the self-isolation. He documented the financial collapse, the unpaid mortgage, the unpaid obligations. He documented, in prose whose restraint made it more damning rather than less, a pattern that family law experts who reviewed the order afterward would describe in much less measured terms. One of them, family law attorney Tashina Gorgon, reviewed the ruling publicly in the days after Cerina's death. Of the court's reluctance to mandate psychiatric treatment or parenting classes, she said plainly, in an interview with WUSA 9, that the decision was, in her words, not protective of children or of women. The ruling also documented the opposite side of the household. It described Cerina, in the court's own finding, as the undisputed primary caregiver to her children in every aspect of their lives. It described her as a port in a storm. It acknowledged that she had carried the household, as primary scheduler, disciplinarian, cook, and nurturer, while running her dental practice as the family's primary earner. And the court attributed her children's emotional survival, across the 3 years of their father's withdrawal, to the mother's grit that had, in the judge's direct words, held them together. What the court stopped short of doing is the reason many people are now asking why Cerina Fairfax is dead at 49. It did not order him into psychiatric treatment. It did not order him into parenting classes. It did not order the firearm removed. It described the conditions. It did not change them. Virginia's family courts are not currently equipped to intervene in escalating mental health crises before they become violent criminal ones. This is not a statement against Judge Timothy J. McEvoy personally. He followed the procedures available to him. He wrote down what he saw. He ordered the remedies he had authority to order. He ruled on custody. He imposed the vacate deadline. He left a paper trail that, read after the fact, reads almost like a forecast. What he did not do, and under existing Virginia family law, could not do, was compel Justin Fairfax into psychiatric care on the strength of a civil custody finding. He could not require the surrender of a legally owned firearm. He could not issue the kind of emergency civil protective order the Commonwealth statutes reserve for cases in which violence has already occurred or been explicitly threatened. Cerina had already done every piece of the work the system did not. She filed for divorce. She rebutted a false police report. She installed the home surveillance that proved it. She won primary physical custody of her children. She secured a court-ordered move-out date. She had used every legal mechanism the Commonwealth of Virginia currently offers a woman in her situation. She did not survive it. Family law attorneys who reviewed the file in the days after her death said openly what the file itself only implies: Virginia's current framework is structurally reactive rather than proactive. Warning signs alone, even when documented in writing by a sitting judge, do not yet trigger statutory protective action in the Commonwealth's family courts. The record of what the system saw, and what it could not stop in time, now sits permanently in the Fairfax County Circuit Court. Cerina Wanzer Fairfax wanted a quiet life with her children. She wanted to keep running her practice. She wanted her chickens and her trail runs and her dogs. She wanted the small farm she had been dreaming out loud about for years with the stylist who cut her hair. She wanted, by every account of every person who knew her in her final weeks, to finish raising her son and her daughter in peace. The institutions she served remember her. The Virginia Commonwealth University School of Dentistry, the school that honored her in 2015 as its outstanding graduate of the last decade, issued a statement in the days after her killing describing her as a mentor and a role model. The Virginia Dental Association released its own statement, citing the volunteer work and community charity that had defined her career outside the clinic. Her patients laid flowers at the door of her Route 29 practice. One longtime patient and friend, Taryn Sims II, told reporters simply that he would not be seeing another dentist. Her children are with family. The community of Fairfax County will remember her, for decades, as the dentist whose door was always open. Her husband spent his adult life arguing inside courts of law. In the end, the only court that mattered was a small home security system his wife had installed to keep herself safe. It recorded. It watched. It did, silently, the protective work three separate institutions, the courts, the police, and the statutory framework of the Commonwealth itself, had not managed to do in time. Cerina did everything right. Every safe action. Every legal filing. Every installed camera. Every motion the court granted in her favor. None of it was enough, because the system that should have intervened had already seen the warnings, and chosen, in the careful language of a court order, only to describe them. This case is not ancient history. The failure documented in Cerina Fairfax's file is happening, right now, inside thousands of ordinary family court proceedings across this country, in households where a distressed spouse has a firearm and a court order, and where no statutory authority currently exists to intervene before the worst outcome arrives. If you believe that has to change, share this video. Not because it is shocking. Share it because the people who could change it need to know it is still being talked about. And if this was your first case with Fatal Casebook, subscribe and turn on notifications. Every subscriber is a reason the decisions made inside courtrooms like this one get a wider audience the next time a judge sits down to rule on a firearm in a house that is already showing every warning sign on the record. Cerina's story is not finished until the Commonwealth that documented it learns how to stop the next one. Remember her name.